So today, well, I'm Marianne Brody, and I'm the executive director and also an ACPE certified educator. And I work with clinical pastoral education students through Crosswords of Caring. And we have student interns that are often at your sites. We had one that started at East House a while ago. And she ended up, because of COVID, having to move to another place.
I'll take care of it.
Somebody's microphone is on. I think I'm going to mute everybody. There we go. So now my phone is interfering. So we also have students at East House, Catholic Family Center, Villa of Hope, Episcopal Senior Life Communities, to name a few of our sites. And our students do 300 clinical hours in their placement. So part of what we're doing with our partner sites is trying to give every couple months a little bit of information, kind of some of the stuff that we're giving our students to give it to you because you're partners with us in this program. So today we're going to talk a little about spiritual assessment, what that is, and things that can lead to spiritual distress. So let's jump in. I'm hoping that my screen will work. There we go. So I think it's important to talk about what spirituality is, because spiritual care providers are not just dealing with religion. They're not just working with one denomination or one faith tradition. Typically, when we talk about spirituality, it involves the recognition of a feeling or sense or belief that there is something greater than yourself, something more to being human than the sensory experience, touch, feel, taste, those things, and that the greater whole of which we are a part is cosmic or divine in nature, so that there's something transcending, something outside of our humanness going on. So that's one definition of spirituality. Christina Pachalski is actually a medical doctor, a physician, and she defines spirituality this way. She said, spirituality is a dynamic, changing, and intrinsic aspect of humanity through which persons seek ultimate meaning, purpose, and transcendence, and experience relationship to self, to family, to others, to community, to society, to nature, and to the significant or sacred. Spirituality is expressed through beliefs, values, traditions, and practices. So spirituality isn't something necessarily that we are taught. Spirituality is something that we experience. So as she talks about it, it's dynamic. It's not something that stays the same. If you think about your spiritual life when you were a child, you probably had certain beliefs and values and traditions that you practiced. And as you grew and mature, those probably, for most people, changed throughout their life. And those things were impacted by your life experiences. Most people believe in something. They don't call that something God. They don't necessarily call that something, they don't even refer to it as a God. They may not think of it as something that is personal, as in a person that they believe in, but they believe in something. And so when we do a spiritual assessment, what we want to do is to try to ascertain what people are believing in, what gives their life meaning, what gives their life value, and what kinds of traditions and practices help to support those beliefs and values so that they can be used to help them cope with whatever is happening within their lives in the moment. So if you think of the word spiritual and you think of the word religious or religion, what are words that come up for spiritual? And this is your time to add your input. So you can turn on your mic and think, when somebody says they're spiritual, what do you think of? Don't be shy.
I think more of spiritual. I think of a relationship with me, it's with Jesus, but whatever you're believing in, versus the religious is more of the law, the rules and whatever. I think of relationship versus rules type of thing.
Relationship versus rules. Thanks, Mary.
Yeah, yeah.
How about others?
Well, I can think because my background is rather humorous. The religion is for people who don't want to go to hell. Spirituality is for people who've already been there.
What makes you say that?
Well, I'm a peer, so I talk about my own history. I'm very 12-step oriented. And so we struggle with this a lot. People reading religion into the spirituality. And it puts a distance between you and the true experience of your higher power, I think.
So you've seen religion create some walls.
For people, yeah.
Barriers.
And myself too, certainly.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. That's true for other people too. How about others? Anyone else?
Religion
Steve.
is more the sociological normative piece, the religious, versus the spiritual is the internal personal piece that glues you together with your values and your norms versus the outside, versus what the outside world expects. So I see religion as the outside and spirituality is
the inside. So you're making a distinction between something that you've really claimed and owned for yourself and the outside world that's imposing perhaps another structure on you.
I like that, Sheila. I like that description too. Yeah.
Anyone else?
I just like another kind of thought process too. Like I have always seen like spiritual versus a religion. Spiritual is a little bit more broad. With religion, you have that box of that religion. You are Catholic, you are Jewish, you are Buddhist. You know, it's a label. Whereas spirituality, it's a little bit more open and broad for like the experiences. So like, for example, I'm pagan. So I can say like, I don't necessarily stick to one specific pathway. I can explore other ones in my spirituality. It's a little bit more open and broad.
Erica Graybar, please call reception. Erica Graybar, please call reception.
In that experience.
Thanks. So if people could mute unless they're talking, I think that would help keep some of the chatter out of our conversation.
So like you can be spiritual without having a religion.
So you don't have to have religion to be spiritual.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Very true. So anyone else? Let's maybe we have one more.
I think off of that comment or that conversation, religion is man-made, spiritual is not. Is kind of how my thoughts on that comment.
That's an interesting idea, Mary. So what is spiritual? Where does it come from? It comes
through a relationship with God, or to me with God and Jesus, but to whatever you believe in, that's between you and that thing or that person. The religion is a man-made thing that with these rules and these, regulations and whatever. So you're all coming up with some similar things that students in our program have brought up. For spiritual, they'd say it's more inclusive, more universal. These are just some of their ideas. I'm going to add to your own. It's personal with regard to values and beliefs. It's not necessarily aligned or attributed to a religion or a doctrine or dogma. It is relational, which several of you said, that it's about your relationship to nature, or you have a sense of the transcendent through your relationship with other things, through nature, through music,
through your meditation, through whatever is happening within yourself, within your own physical body, you can have a sense of the transcendent. Often people who are talking in a spiritual way use the language of deep meaning or life purpose, reason for existing. And this spirituality may be unique to the person. It's something that has developed within themselves over time. And it may have similarities to what other people are describing, and there may be uniquenesses to their own spirituality that only come out as you talk to them. It tends to be maybe more intuitive. And it's something felt often, and maybe Sheila, you were getting to that too. It's something that's within you. It's felt as opposed to something that's been poured in or taught to you from another source. They described religion as a place where there are often expectations, and one isn't good and one isn't bad. So don't think of it in terms of that. Just with religion often comes expectation with regard to who has power, who has authority, who's in and who's out. Are you a member or are you not a member? Do you belong to us or do you not belong to us? And a lot of times that membership has to do with whether or not you are evidencing behaviors that are acceptable within the group. Do you dress appropriately? Are you doing the kinds of things that we do? And if you aren't, then you don't fit in. There are traditions and customs that come along with religions, saying the rosary, daily prayers, customs about how you dress. Amish folk dress differently than English. So things come with religion that don't necessarily come if you say you're spiritual. There are rites and rituals. In many churches, there are liturgies. So there's a formal way of worshiping together, and this is how we do it. I sit in this pew. You don't get to sit there because that's where my family has sat for the last 5 generations. There's baptisms, confirmations. In other faith traditions, there are different rites of passage that happen within those traditions as a Hindu, as a Muslim, as a Sikh. Religions are often slow to respond to culture. They don't change quickly. Spirituality is not necessarily that way. The spiritual connection, sometimes an important event can change it on a dime. Religion's not so much. In religion, often there is some kind of interaction or communication about God, and there's God language. In spiritual, people who are spiritual may use God language, they may not use God language. When I was doing work with a couple, premarital counseling, they came to the church. I'm an Episcopal priest. They wanted me to marry them. They had grown up in the church, but were distant from it now. And I said, well, as part of the rite, I usually talk for a little while. And so I'm curious what you believe. Do you believe in God? And they said, no. And I said, okay. Do you believe in some kind of universal force or presence that's outside of yourself? Oh, yeah, we believe in that. And so in my head, I'm like, well, then you believe in God. But it's not the same to them. Their version of God is something they can't attach themselves to. And so being able to use their language and talk with their words and really helping them explore what they believe is one way of coming to understand where they are. A lot of times there are codes or confessions, doctrine, dogma that go along with religion that spiritual people will not have. So it's much more formalized. Religion is institutionalized. It's got rules and regulations. So when someone said, I think it was Sheila said, relationship versus rules, that's a pretty good summary of the difference. So when you go and meet someone, when as a spiritual care provider, when I go and meet someone, or you as a care provider, in whatever format you're in, there are three different kinds of assessments or evaluations. There's an assessment, there's a screening, or you can do a history. A lot of times there's a screening, and it happens when you go to the hospital. They might ask you two questions. What church do you attend, and do you want to visit from spiritual care? They don't ask anything else about it. They just leave that up to you. And that's their spiritual screening. It doesn't give you a whole lot of information. A history is kind of included in any other kind of history you might do. If you were a social worker, you might do a social history. If you are meeting someone for the first time and you're a peer counselor, then you might be getting some of their history with whatever situation you're working with them in. So most of these histories have acronyms: FICA, HOPE, FAC, FAITH. Those are all acronyms for different ways of gathering a history, a spiritual history. And they were almost all developed by actually medical doctors, because they are the ones who typically do histories. So they would come and meet a patient, and then they would say, wow, mind, body, spirit, right? Biopsychosocial, spiritual approach. Okay, well, I have to assess them some way. And chaplains, for whatever reason, spiritual care providers haven't come up with their own system, so they developed it themselves. A lot of people, so these are very helpful to do quick kinds of assessments in whatever setting you're in, as an adjunct to whatever other history that you're doing. And then a spiritual assessment is really usually done by a chaplain or a spiritual care provider, and it's a longer conversation. You might take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes talking with someone about their faith journey. What has happened to you as far as your faith? Where did you start? Where have you come? What's happened to you in between? What kind of things have impacted your life? So I think what would be most appropriate in your positions, or how do you do a spiritual history? And we're going to look at FICA. FICA was developed by Christina Pacholski. She's a medical doctor, and she works at, I think, George Washington University Hospital. So the FICA, F-I-C-A, it corresponds to faith or beliefs, importance or influence, community, and then address or action. So we're going to just take a look at each one of these. So when you're asking someone about their faith or beliefs, you can ask these kinds of questions. Do you consider yourself to be spiritual? It doesn't assume that someone has a religion or not a religion. You're dealing with spirituality. Is spirituality something that's important to you? So those are yes or no questions. They're going to be quick yes or no answers. Or they might go, maybe. And then you can do some follow-up things. Do you have spiritual beliefs, practices, or values that help you to cope with stress, with difficult times, or with what you're going through right now? So what are those things, those spiritual beliefs, practices, and values that are helping you right now? You can also attack it from the point of meaning. What gives your life meaning? Because even if they say they're not spiritual, something hopefully gives their life meaning. It might be family. It might be children. It might be living independently. It might be being able to get up every morning and dress myself. But what is it that gives your life meaning? Because whatever gives your life meaning is the thing you can't lose. If you lose that, you're in a very dark place. So it's good to ask what gives your life meaning, even if the other questions are answered. No, I'm not spiritual. No, I don't consider myself spiritual, and spirituality isn't important to me. Still ask them what gives your life meaning, because something does, hopefully. The I in FICA is about importance or influence. So in that way, you're talking about what importance does spirituality or your source of meaning, be sure to include that, especially if they say they're not spiritual. What importance does your source of meaning have in your life? So what importance does it have for you to get up in the morning and be able to dress yourself? And how has your spirituality influenced how you take care of yourselves, particularly regarding your health and well-being? Does spirituality affect your healthcare decision-making? Because that could be really important. Sometimes our faith and our spirituality is in conflict with what medical providers are suggesting or what therapists or counselors are suggesting that we do. If they're in conflict, that's going to be a problem. C is about community. Most people find that their spirituality is supported in some kind of community. It may not be a church, a synagogue, a temple, a mosque, but some kind of spiritual relationship with another person. And so just ask them, are you part of a spiritual community? And they may say yes, or I used to be. Some people can get defensive a little, they can feel a little vulnerable when you ask them that question, especially if they used to be churchgoers and they don't go to church anymore, or they used to practice a certain kind of spiritual discipline and they don't now. There might be a tinge of either regret or guilt because I don't do that anymore. Oh, I went to church, but I don't anymore. So to normalize that and to say, that's okay. Tell me about what you do. What are you doing that supports your spirituality? How are you connected with a community? And to ask them if they say they are part of a spiritual community, how is that community a source of support to you now? And if they don't have one, well, who are the people that you really love? Who are the people that are really important to you that can support you right now? Or how are they supporting you right now? And maybe they're not. So it's good to know if they're not. And then the A is how are you going to address or what action do you want to take? So just to ask them, how would you like me as your healthcare provider, as your social worker, as your case manager, as your financial advisor, whatever your position is, to address spiritual issues in your healthcare? And some people will be surprised that you even asked because they don't expect necessarily their healthcare provider to ask. Though when they've done studies, a majority of people feel affirmed when you do ask, even if they say, nope, there's nothing you need to do. They're comforted because they've been asked. So that FICA, F-I-C-A, that acronym is pretty easy to remember, the 4 letters. And if you can just remember faith, I already forgot the I. Faith, importance or influence, community, and address or action. So that's why they use these acronyms, to try to make them easy for you to use. You don't always have to go in order. You can go through when you come out of it, you want to be sure that you've answered those 4 areas. So they may start talking about their church. Oh, okay. So then you have that piece. Or they may talk about, you have the community piece. They may talk about how important it is in the beginning. So don't feel like it has to go in that linear order. The information can come out in any way that's natural and organic. So there are several sources of distress. Kenneth Pargament has done some work on religiosity and what causes spiritual distress. And in one of his studies in early 2000, I think it was 2003 or 2006, he identified some red flags. So when something happens and people have doubts, when they start to doubt their foundational beliefs, that's a sign of spiritual distress. Why would God do this to me? I thought God was good. Why is this happening to me? If they think God is punishing them, I'm sick because of something I did, and God is punishing me for it. I ended up in a divorce because of my alcoholism, and now I'm being punished. I have no one left to help me. It's hard to pull yourself out of that dark place if you think that something outside of yourself is imposing a punishment upon you. Sometimes our religious ideas make us apathetic. We feel powerless. This is out of my hands. This is in God's hands, and there's nothing I can do. I can't change this. There's nothing that any action I can take that will make this any better. And it's grounded in your religious beliefs or your values that have come to you. If you're the one who's angry at God, that can be a barrier too, to using your faith as a support. Because when you're angry at someone, you just want to lash out. You want to push them away. So the thing that may have been a support for you in the past isn't available to you anymore. If there's a conflict, an interpersonal conflict within your church community, that can create problems as well and create spiritual distress. And last, if you've come to a point where what you personally believe is in conflict with what your religious community believes, or religious doctrine that you've adhered to, or confessions that you have taken on for yourself, that disconnect can create spiritual distress as well. And these all may be things that you've experienced in your own life. Has anybody had an experience of this where they've had doubt or conflict or felt punished by God or been angry with God or found that their own personal beliefs were suddenly in conflict with the beliefs of their tradition? Has anyone had that experience?
I can
One
speak
of
for my
the-
own.
Go ahead, John.
I thank you, Sheila. I can speak from my own personal experiences. When I was using substances, I studied Tibetan Buddhism with a Lama here in town. And when I entered 12-step recovery, I knew I needed to get a higher power outside of me. So I shifted. But it was a very tumultuous time for me for a number of reasons. But I did make that transition. And now I'm pretty comfortable with the faith that I've developed. So thank you.
So you needed a new God.
Yeah. Fired the old one.
That's right. You fire the old one and you find the new one. Thanks, John. Sheila?
Oh, what I was going to say is one that is universal in the fact that Christianity did not consider anyone who was not, quote, baptized as human beings. Therefore, my people were considered only 3/4 of a human being.
Mhm.
And the consequences of that. And you continue on with everything that we're experiencing in society right now.
Very true. So you were on the out from the get-go.
Never was. And that's the other piece. There's a difference between being a part of and then being pushed out versus not being included at all.
That's right.
And so my folks were forced to be included, to be considered anything.
It's a very painful place to be.
And then you wonder why we have so much problems in the world? Duh.
Mhm. Everybody wants to be a full person, to be recognized, to be valued, and to have that transcendent being, whatever, power say, nope, you don't count. has a direct impact on your view of yourself as a person. Yeah. Thanks, Sheila. How about others? Yeah, Suzanne?
Here, unmuted myself. Thank you.
That's good.
I love this discussion. And for me, it was the 911 God. Get me out of this one. I'll never do it again. Get me out of this one. I'll never do it again. But then when an active addiction, I made empty promises to myself, which meant I wasn't worthy of being helped or saved. And so I was baptized Methodist, but I really never knew what that meant. And when I came into recovery, God was the first one on my resentment list. How could you let, exactly what you just said, Marianne, how could you let this happen to me? I must not be worthy. I don't deserve to be here. And the day I stood at the turning point and asked God to help me with complete surrender was when something changed in me. And I could see where all of those dangerous situations I had put myself in, I was still here. Something helped me get out of those things alive. And it was not me or the situation I put myself in.
Mhm.
So that's how I came to have a spiritual experience right away, because something was different when I honestly in my heart asked for help if I was worthy enough to be saved. I truly felt the shift in that something was there.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate your honesty and vulnerability. It makes me think about, that's the piece with the religious apathy, right? It's I'm not worthy. I don't matter. When Sheila was talking about we couldn't be baptized, it's I don't matter. Those are the messages that slowly eat away at our self-esteem, our self-worth, our reason for being. So coming to that point where you could say, I am worthy, was an important turning point in your spiritual development. I am worthy. Yeah. Anyone else? I remember I grew up Roman Catholic. My family is all still Roman Catholic. And I can remember a lot of messages, and in other, suicide definitely was a no-no. And there was no recovery. So back at the time before they changed the thinking in the Catholic Church, if you committed suicide, yeah, it was a mortal sin. And the family were the ones who really had to deal with that. Alcoholism, a lot of religious traditions look at that as a personal defect and don't have a lot of tolerance or understanding of it as a disease. Addiction as a disease of the brain, mental illness. So there are a lot of conditions and situations that we get into as human beings that are just part of normal, the normality that religion has addressed in very negative ways. And so coming to understand our full humanity and understanding how we can work within that to become better people, that we are not stuck, can be an important part of our spiritual development. Because oftentimes faith has taught us that we're not in control of those things. We were born that way. We're not worth it.
It's something too, now that you mention that, is that, I stayed in an abusive relationship. I was on the street doing this and that because I didn't think that I was worth recovery.
Well, and I've had siblings who have stayed in abusive relationships because they were told that in marriage, you don't get divorced. So you stay. So those are points of spiritual distress and incontinuity. There is some work there that can be done. And that's when you call this spiritual specialist, the spiritual care provider or the chaplain, whoever's in your organizations, to say, hey, you know, there's some discontinuity there. There's something going on. Would you be willing to go in and talk with so-and-so, or would you be willing to talk to me if it happens to be you in that case? To help to work through some of those sticking points so that your faith, your spirituality can be a resource for you rather than cause you distress.
That's one of the reasons why I said earlier that religion is a social cultural piece,
Mhm.
because religion is how human beings created norms and values. And there is a specific structure, whether right, wrong, or otherwise, but it's a standard that the larger community recognizes and is willing to follow.
And religion was a way to help set behavioral standards.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Back in medieval times, the fear of God was a very
Right.
potent motivator.
Yeah.
So if we want society to be, we want people to be able to get along, we need to do what God says. And here's what God says. And there were people who are willing to tell us what God said.
And when did God die and leave them in charge?
Yeah. So becoming mature in your faith takes a little work, because you have to use your reasoning and you have to use your spirit, your mind, body, and spirit. You have to use all three to develop maturely in your faith. So let's look. So in response to specific stressors, these responses of spiritual distress, they come because people's religious world has been shaken, or their spiritual world has been shaken. The foundations of what they've believed in have suddenly taken on a new light or have a new meaning, or are causing doubts or questions that need to be answered. And the answers are within us. But sometimes we can only get to them by talking them out with somebody else. And when a spiritual care provider or a chaplain comes into a room, they're not coming in to give someone answers. They're coming in to help people uncover the answer that's already in themselves. We trust that the answer and the information, the insight, the revelation, that it's there. We just have to give the space, create a space and an opportunity for that to be uncovered. And sometimes that can happen in 15 minutes, and sometimes it takes years.
I know when I mentioned my spiritual awake experience, the day I surrendered, I was at the end of my ropes, and I looked up at the sky and said, if anybody's up there, help me find the answers of what I do next. And I really felt something different. And that was the power that propelled me further.
Right.
And I knew it was there all along. It was just hidden under all the kinds of crap.
So that exploration can be life-giving. It may be difficult, but it's life-giving as well. So sometimes our spiritual distress is caused because we have a lack of spiritual supports, or something has gotten in the way of what we normally use or do that helps to provide a support and comfort in times of stress. If being outside is really important to you and you're stuck in a hospital bed, or you're homebound for some reason, or it's COVID and you're not allowed to go outside of your space, you're in a nursing home and now you're stuck in your room, you can't go for that walk. People aren't allowed to visit, you're isolated, you can't talk to that friend, you don't know how to use the technology. You can't practice normal rituals. Like for Roman Catholics, some of them, daily communion is vital to their spiritual health. Performing some kind of daily prayer, reading from sacred texts, eating kosher. What do you mean you can't provide me kosher food? Or I can't get my kosher food because I can't go to the store, or I can't get out. Not being able to practice those regular rituals or attending the normal religious holidays can be really disrupting to people's lives and prevent them from being able to cope in ways that would really be beneficial in normal times. Listening to music, maybe they can't hear anymore. They're not allowed to have an iPhone anymore. They're not allowed to have the device that gave them the ability to listen to the music. They can't watch a show that's important to them. Painting, drawing, journaling, knitting, a lot of those kinds of things are very meditative. And people feel spiritual connection by doing them. Knitting is very repetitive. Crocheting, a lot of the hand arts, drawing, painting, there's something that requires your total focus, and it actually frees your mind for a period of time from those things that are troubling or causing you discomfort or stress. So being able to spend the time doing those things that demand your full attention can really be healing spiritually. Not being able to meditate, maybe that's too much noise, or there's not the space that you're normally used to. So thinking about those kind of things and the ways that barriers may be imposed on people in ways that prevent them from being able to do those things that normally give them comfort and nurture. So as a spiritual care provider, what we try to do is help people explore and decrease their spiritual distress and recognize and identify spiritual supports that they can use in order to help them get through difficult periods. If you think of kind of mental health as a box, we're all working on our own mental health. And sometimes something happens that throws us out of our box. And we need to figure out how to get back in. And our spiritual lives are a piece of that help us to be able to function more in our normal range within the box. So that's what I have. I thought perhaps we could have a little bit of time for just any questions or conversation. What came up for you as we were talking? Anything that you haven't already voiced?
One of the things that came up for me was right in the beginning when you used the example of what religion or spirituality do you have? And you mentioned Episcopal, Roman Catholic, Presbyterian. One of the problems that still exists today is that there are other religions. And so one of the negatives is I go into the hospital, what do you practice? Look at me. Huh? And so I have an annoyance with the majority community that only recognizes, quote, recognizable spiritual religious belief system. And I think that's something that folks need to come to grips with. because that too is very offensive. You know, someone may be Baha'i, somebody may be
Mhm.
Jainism, you know, there's a whole lot of different belief systems that are not Christian
Mhm.
and that are not known.
Mhm. And
And I can give you a perfect example. I'm a recovering cancer patient also. My oncologist was talking about a woman who was afraid to have a cancer surgery. And I said to her, where's she from?
Hmm.
She's from Haiti. I said, okay. She doesn't need to come to, and I guess she went to see the oncologist with her psychiatrist. She didn't want to have the surgery. So she didn't need to see you with the psychiatrist. You need to ask her, does she want to bring her priest with her? And she looked at me strangely. And then she said the woman had told her she was afraid of the surgery, but she didn't want the demons to come out of her and attack, you know, whoever else was in the room.
mm,
And so I got her all of the medical, the medical anthropological books that I had access to that talked about that kind of thing, and gave her some resources to look for to be able to assist the woman. I'm only one person. How often does that happen?
mhm.
And especially if the person speaks another language or their English is limited.
Mhm. So that was definitely a case where someone's spiritual beliefs impacted their healthcare,
Mhm.
and being aware that a conversation about her spirituality and what it actually meant to her was a really important conversation to have. And
Yes.
to help her think through that
Mhm.
was an important aspect of care.
Right.
Yeah, it's a good thing you were there.
I just told my doctor what to do. I wasn't, and I gave her and I gave her the resources. And thankfully, she was bright enough to follow through, you know, with the patient. But
Mhm.
it's talking. I'm talking about a larger issue than just for that person. That's a broad issue that we need to begin to look at, especially when you're talking about spirituality.
Mhm. I think that too raises the importance of doing some kind of spiritual history when people come in, when you're first working with people, so that you know kind of what kind of, you can recognize when spiritual distress is happening and get the resources you need to help them address what needs to be addressed, rather than um, just letting it go on. Yeah, and confuse things.
Mhm. Mhm.
Absolutely.
Because my judgment in this type of work, if you don't have a reasonable spiritual foundation, you're going to continue to struggle with substance use and with mental illness for your entire life. So for me, that's a major part of what I do.
Mhm. And I see John shaking his head, nodding, and Liz
Nodding my head, yes.
nodding your head.
Yeah, Mary, and one of my jobs is to help people quit smoking. And I say to them, you know, if any bond you have with a higher power or God or anything, this is when you really need it.
Yeah. Yeah, because addiction is a gorilla.
Sorry?
Addiction is a gorilla.
Yeah.
It's often not something you tackle just by yourself. It's too big. That's step one, right?
Mhm.
So being able to access these spiritual tools, whatever they may be for you, the spiritual supports is really, really important, I think, in a recovery from addiction and alcoholism. Because if we could do it on our own, I think it wouldn't be as difficult. We'd have success more quickly. I don't know. That's what I'm hoping, but no, it's not. It's not that way. Anything else that came up for people? We only have a couple more minutes. So maybe in this 2 minutes that we have left here, maybe what's one thing you're going to take away from this conversation?
For me, it was helpful to spend time and carve out time to even have this conversation. And so in a way, it was kind of centering for me in a lot of different ways. And so the feedback and the experiences, I could relate to a lot of them. And so that's something that I'm definitely going to take away. Just I'm grateful that we have the time and the space to do this because it's rare. And so, you know, the opportunity is something that means a lot in folks sharing.
Thanks, Liz.
Often, Marianne, I'm confused because I might talk to somebody up here and they say, you know, I hate my life. I'm alone. I have no job, no friends. And I'm kind of like a little confused how to respond because historically, social service agencies did not get into your spirituality. And so I came here looking for some answers. Thank you.
I'm glad that this was available. Me being who I am, do it anyway. As John said, I have a tendency to go against the norm. But the importance is that now it's starting to be recognized as an aspect for therapeutic growth, not just with alcohol and substances, but for any kind of mental healthiness.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be some sense. I usually use the word when I talk about it as grounding. What is your grounding?
Mm-hmm.
What keeps you balanced? To avoid using the G word, because I've run into too many times when you mention the G word, all hell breaks loose. So I stay away from that when I do that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Sheila. My friend Phyllis Jackson says spiritual health is a mental health issue.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Anyone else before we close here? I won't fill that space for a minute. So John, you've given me an idea for a future lunch and learn, just to talk about reflective listening and different ways of responding, especially to difficult situations. So I'll keep that in mind. In August, Phyllis Jackson and I are going to be presenting as part of the Partners for Suicide Prevention monthly programs on suicide and spirituality. So that'll be our lunch and learn as well.
Good.
So thank you all for being
Thank
here.
you, Marianne. Thank you,
And
everyone.
hope we see you again.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye.